every year the number of qubits required goes down, and every year the number of qubits we have goes up. Eventually these two meet. So my common question to people that say, oh, it'll never happen is, with what physics? Because I haven't seen any physics that says this is impossible. Let's say they come up with this cryptographically relevant quantum computer, and it's not made by IBM or Google. If they tell us exactly what and when, we can counter it. So why would they tell us? They don't have to tell us. In some cases, they can't tell us. When you're looking at post-quantum cryptography, this is like putting on a seatbelt. If you put on the seatbelt after the car crash, it doesn't help. The 2030 deadline that NIST gave, that's for banks. Blockchain gets broken before that. We are living on borrowed time in Bitcoin. And my concern is that there won't be enough migration time because we've wasted so much time. Time's up. We have to make a decision. Our inability to rationally discuss decisions is the biggest risk to Bitcoin.
Firstly, Ian, I would like to welcome you to the Bitcoin Dialectic.
Thank you.
We both know that the Bitcoin community is really divided on the issue of quantum computing. So Google and Atomic, they dropped papers potentially advancing the timeline of a cryptographically relevant quantum computer by several years at least. And the community has basically split into two sort of halves or factions. On one side, you have people who believe that we should be prepared and we should act as soon as we can. On the other hand, you have people who argue that a cryptographically relevant quantum computer is at least a few decades into the future, but it's also possible that it might never arrive. At the core of this disagreement is a lack of clarity on the actual progress in building quantum computers, in scaling them up. You have been active in this space for a very long time. You've been following developments in quantum computing for a couple of decades now. You are the co-author of BIP 361, which is the most comprehensive proposal I've seen to migrate Bitcoin to post-quantum computing. Before we dive into all of this, before we dive into the debate, can you introduce yourself to people who are listening to this?
Hello, my name is Ian Smith, and I started off in technology in the mid-90s. I was in Silicon Valley for the dot-com boom in 2000 as a network security consultant. I taught Linux, and I was a consultant at NASA, Visa, McDonnell, Boeing, and Oracle back in the year 2000. I have done an enormous amount of, programming, AI, and clustering compute since 1998, and I have a background in security. My first involvement with cryptocurrency was the year 2002, 6 years before Bitcoin, where I was trying to make RSA cryptography into individual pieces of currency.
Let's start with the basics. Why does quantum computing pose a threat to Bitcoin?
So it poses a threat to all cryptography in different ways. When you look at blockchain, there's this distributed ledger of public and private keys where your private key proves your funds on the public ledger. And if you can sign a transaction, then that proves that that money is yours. Quantum computers can take the ledger recorded public key and convert that into the private key. So Bitcoin, this affects 35% of the supply. So it's really the ability to drain someone's wallet, no matter what architecture they're using, if the public key is known.
What is quantum computing? How does it work? How is it different from classical computing? Can you briefly explain these?
So as I said, you can only do addition and comparison on silicon computer. So when you're doing multiplication, you're just doing addition, lots of times. And there's some tricks that you can do in binary to speed that up. But that's what your operations are all addition and comparison. It's just tricks at doing addition. When you look at quantum computing, you're using physics, and there's a different process. You have to load your question into the physics, let physics calculate the answer, and then read your answer out. And this is a very important thing to understand. Reading the information destroys it. So there's a lot of things that happen under the hood for quantum computers. There's things you cannot violate, like you can't copy data, which makes it really hard to do error correction and things like this. There's a lot of operations that are involved in this, and most of them involve like pi, sine, cosine, e to the power of I, doing lots of pi calculations and rotations of matrices and so forth. So it's a lot of advanced math. It's not going to be able to play, Quake or Doom or World of Warcraft or anything like that. It's only going to solve very specific mathematical questions.
So let's dive into the weeds now. The headline finding of the Google paper was that at n equal to 256 bits, the circuits use either 1200 logical qubits with 90 million Toffoli gates or 1450 logical qubits with 70 million Toffoli gates to break the 256-bit ECDSA, which protects your Bitcoin private keys from, the public keys itself, from being reverse engineered by the public keys. So firstly, what do these terms mean? These terms use logical qubits and Toffoli gates. So let's start with the basics, like what are qubits?
Okay, so a qubit is kind of a thing that holds information when you're loading that question in. Your smallest unit of calculation is a qubit. And you have to use multiple qubits to do different things. A Toffoli gate, I remember when they were like, it's 12 qubits to make one Toffoli gate, and now the number is 5. So we're increasing the efficiency of all of these different methods. But the smallest unit you can use is 1 qubit. It's generally like 1 neutral atom, or it's 1 laser hitting 1 trapped ion, or it's 1 electron in an electron spin, or it's 1 photon in a photonic network. There's lots of ways of creating qubits. There's over 40 physics methods that are in use now, but they all have the same basic unit of information, 1 qubit. And the value varies between 0 and 1, as I'm sure everybody's basically heard by now. And those qubits are both similar to a bit, and it's also the method of constructing all of your instructions. So not only do you use them to hold information, but you use it to operate on information too.
Okay. So when you say these are the qubits, the neutral atom or the ion or an electron in a certain spin, they are also usually referred to as physical qubits, right?
Yes. When you are creating a logical qubit, you've created error correction. And there are, I looked today, there's over 1,060 different kinds of error correction in order to achieve a logical qubit, depending on the geometry, depending on the type. There's no agreement on how good does the qubit have to be considered a logical qubit. When you look at some hardware vendors, they're claiming a really high number of logical qubits. And then you look at another vendor and they're claiming a really low number of logical qubits. And they have nothing in common except that it's 1 error-corrected piece of information. You're able to use 5 or 10 qubits or 100 qubits on a physical level and make it act as one logical qubit for doing error-corrected calculations. And since these calculations and these qubits can last like microseconds, it's really important to get that error correction in order to make it so that you can finish the calculation before it just self-destructs.
What is this error that you're correcting? Where is this error coming from?
That depends entirely on the substrate, on like what physics method you're using to create those. When you look at superconducting qubits, you see those big chandeliers. They're just one gigantic cooling system. Heat is the most common error. But if someone gets a cell phone call within 100 meters, then that's also going to cause an error. So they try and shield it from everything, and they have to deal with all, like there was claims that gravity will prevent them from having too many qubits. And there's tons of things that will interfere with their calculations. When you look at another kind of qubit called cat qubit, these are super resistant to heat and errors, and they're immune to most error types. When you look at photonics, they don't care about heat. They don't care about magnets. They don't care about radio frequencies. They're immune to most of that stuff. There's still some methods of having errors on photonic qubits, but those are specific to the photonic methods, and it's usually related to the measurement, and if the fiber optics are low quality, then that causes massive problems.
We'll talk about the specific like architectures or substrates that are used and the strengths and challenges with each of them. But I want to summarize what you said about the qubits first to make sure that I'm getting this right. You put together a bunch of different physical qubits and you error correct them, and then the shielded bunch that you get acts as one logical qubit, and the logical qubit is what you can use to both store information and to perform operations inside a quantum computer.
Exactly. You can think of it like a RAID drive. So if you have a RAID in your computer, like you have like 5 drives that pretend to be like slightly bigger than any one of those 5 drives. That's one. There's an error correction that's very similar. It's a 5-to-3 ratio. You can use like disk mirrors where there's 2 disks and they're pretending to be one drive. That one drive would be like a logical qubit. That's a 2-to-1 error correction, right? So the failure states of those drives is very similar to the failure states of those logical qubits. And it's in some cases the same math. In some cases it's really crazy math for determining what's a logical qubit. But it's basically like a drive letter to hold information in your computer.
Okay. And is this where fault tolerance comes into the picture?
It's possible to do fault tolerance in hardware, in software, in error codes, in ancillary qubits. There's lots of different techniques, but yes, it is essentially the same thing. It's just that like you can have errors being caught in your software, or you can have errors being caught in your hardware, or you can have error correction in your drive array. It's possible to do that error correction at every level, including sending and receiving messages in case your internet's really bad or your Wi-Fi is really bad. You can do error correction on each of these things. And all of those techniques for providing silicon error correction have some parallel in quantum computing, where you're doing error correction at every level in different ways, and there's different techniques for doing it. Now, there are differences. There are things you can do in silicon that you literally cannot do in physics. It violates quantum physics to attempt to do them. So there are differences, but it's the same kind of stuff.
Okay. And what is the threshold for calling a logical qubit fault tolerant?
That is whatever the marketing team can get away with. I reject Quantinuum's claim of 94 logical qubits out of 98 physical qubits. I just don't believe them. I think that they were more accurate saying that they had 48 logical qubits out of 98 physical qubits. Q-Era's original paper, they claimed to have 30 logical qubits out of 3,000 physical qubits. But the paper admitted that they didn't quite have that working at the time of preprint. And they were basically just hoping that it would be fixed by the time that the paper was published. So it's whatever the marketing team think they can get away with.
But ideally, what should it mean to be fault tolerant?
You should be able to finish a calculation without having your data lost. That depends on how long that calculation takes.
Definitely.
Depending on which kind of quantum computer you have, that could take milliseconds, like less than the amount of time it takes you to ping a gaming server, or it can take days. And so the fault tolerance requirements are very different between the two profiles, right? What's a logical qubit? You're hoping that the calculation finishes. And that depends on a lot of things.
I see. Now, what are Toffoli gates?
A Toffoli gate is the idea of having a universal, capable qubit that's able to do every operation that you would want to do that physics allows. Right? It's the most capable gate. When you look at the other gate types, they're usually much cheaper. They require fewer qubits. They're faster to emulate, but they can't do every operation. Now, the Toffoli gates are very important for Bitcoin and breaking, elliptic curves, because you need Toffoli gates. You cannot do this operation without them. So when you look at quantum computers that don't have any Toffoli gates, that no matter how big it is, it can't break Bitcoin flat out. But when you look at how many Toffoli gates they're able to create and how many of them are logical and error corrected, then that starts to make that quantum computer more and more relevant to Bitcoin security.
So if I understand this correctly, and I'll take the Google example here, when they say you need 1450 logical qubits with 70 million Toffoli gates, and in approximately 9 minutes, they'll be able to reverse engineer the private key from a public key with such a quantum computer. What they mean is they will need 1450 logical qubits to be fault tolerant for those 9 minutes, while there are 70 million such operations done using the Toffoli gates on those qubits.
There is, you can think of those gates as physical qubits, but then there was a new technique in 2024 that made me freak out because they were able to reuse gates to do calculations. So instead of needing 7 million or 30 million times 5 qubits, they could take 10,000 qubits and then just cycle them over and over and make them act as those 7 million Toffoli gates eventually. Now, the reason that the logical qubits is really critical is because this is essentially the size of the data. I'll do it vertically here. And so in your typical quantum circuit diagrams, you'll see a certain number of logical qubits to hold the data. And then these are multiplied times the number of gate operations over time. And this was just for a long time, all of these were the same rectangle. It was however many logical qubits you need tall times however many gate operations you need wide. You multiply those two together, and that's how many qubits you need. Now, what changed is that they're able to take and do a window of those qubits. So there's a certain number of logical qubits over a window is able to be looped and reused. So when you're looking at the old papers, you were looking at this massive area, this massive rectangle. You needed all of them. The hidden kind of thing that most people didn't catch in the Google papers that they were talking about a windowed technique of not needing to have so many physical qubits to create all of the physical gates in order to run the entire calculation. They're able to have a certain number of logical and then loop it over and over and over. And so they might need like a rectangle that's 4 times the number of logical qubits, and then just continuously loop them in a neutral atom architecture to perform the same operations. 2024, this technique was pioneered by Litinsky for photonics at PsiQuantum. And the paper was called Active Volume, and that built on a game of surface codes. Those are 2 separate papers, one from 2023, one from 2024. And those papers describe this windowing process for the first time.
Okay. So now that we are already in the topic of like PsiQuantum and photonic qubits, maybe we can walk through the different kinds of approaches to building fault-tolerant quantum computers. And for each of them, we can describe how they work, what is the progress that has been made over the years, what are their biggest advantages, and what are the biggest challenges in scaling them up.
There's around 10 major techniques, and I think I'll just cover like the ones that have actually been turned into computers so far, which cuts the discussion down quite a bit. Starting off with the slowest, the first quantum computers were nuclear magnetic resonance machines. And these are used by hospitals and healthcare, and the scientific version of them is able to read essentially like 1 qubit by reading the magnetic signatures of individual atoms or groups of atoms. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it work very fast. The read and write is just abysmally slow still today. And they have to be cold, and they're limited on type. The next, like fastest one, this is still really slow, would be neutral atoms. And this is a laser pointed at like sodium, or there's dozens of chemical compounds that they can use. But what they're doing is they call them laser tweezers. And Google mentioned this process as well recently. What they're trying to do is they're trying to keep all of these atoms in line and perform operations on them. And so the laser is just literally like shooting this block of atoms over and over and over and over again. The scalability is really good based off just how fast that laser can track individual atoms and push them back and then move on to the next one and do it again. There are neutral atom techniques that use like 1 laser per region, but they're able to make them act like 1 logical unit, and so it's 1 computer. There are systems that did not have Toffoli gates. There are later techniques that made them have full Hadamard and then eventually Toffoli gates. So that universal computing version came out later, like 2025. The main issue on scalability is that they need that laser to work really well, really fast, and it's the absolute engineering limit of that laser that determines how big that can be. There is a recent variation that uses 1 laser per qubit, and they're really weak and they only have to fire once in a while, but this changes the scheduling problem to a single controller and how much power you can dump into it, right? And then there's a hybrid technique that has a lens that changes. Instead of moving the laser around, they just alter the lens. And so they're able to have like 10 or 100 qubits controlled by a single laser. And they're just aiming the lens and they keep shifting. And they're able to just keep firing and keep more atoms in sync that way. This is able to have like a kind of like a ripple effect for the calculations. And so Like the calculation will flow from one direction to the other, and then back, or around in circles. There's lots of different ways of doing it, but they're really just the limitation is that laser. Some of them are room temperature, some of them are 20 millikelvin. The next, in terms of speed of performance, would be trapped ion. And this is an interesting technique where the laser is providing the cooling, so they run at room temperature, but they're more stable than the neutral atoms. This is a technique that Oxford Ionics had good success. They had the longest running, they had the world record for longest qubit coherence multiple times, and nobody else came close. They had, I think, a 4-hour record, and then it was like 18-hour record, and just every time they published it was a new record. What they did not have was a quantum computer.
What's the difference?
They had one qubit that could do no calculations.
Okay, so they just managed to stabilize the qubits for quite some time.
Right. They had the best qubit, one, or sometimes two, but no calculations, no gates, nothing like that. And so they had the best qubit that you couldn't use for anything. And they were predicting that they were going to have a 256 qubit quantum computer back in 2024. It never happened. They sold the company to IonQ, and then IonQ is making all these promises and republishing the same papers and making more promises. And well, they have a quantum computer now, and I think it's like 40 qubits or something. So they've made progress, but I mean, it's really hard to scale the control mechanism. This is usually a series of magnets. It's a laser. That's a microcontroller. It's firing all of these things and then keeping them entangled through some networking architecture, right? And this can be magnets, or it can be microwaves. It can be lasers. There's lots of ways of doing all of this stuff. And there's not really a good recipe until like Quantinuum that actually had a decent quantum computer from that technique and that result. So this is one of those areas where the more companies that work on it, the more likely it is that there'll be more success. Right now, Quantinuum's ahead, and they're very well funded from Honeywell. And this is possibly one of the companies that has received military funding, because Honeywell's been doing military funding for a very long time. They have a lot of experience with trapped ions, and they're scaling it up, but it is a massive coordination problem from like 3 or 4 different technologies all working together, all using different kinds of physics and coordinating the electronics for all of them. Next one would be photonics. And I've seen all kinds of crazy companies, like I think maybe a dozen companies that say they do different things with photonics. And a lot of them are really shady. They're really shady light. There needs to be an emission of a photon. This is a single subatomic, like it's smaller than an atom. It's just one piece of light, one Einstein of light. And that one photon needs to be emitted in a controlled, entangled way, bound to another photon. The easiest way to do that is to have a chemical reaction. If you do one chemical reaction that emits 2 photons, they start off entangled. And we know this is a very stable form of entanglement because we're getting entangled photons from distant stars millions of light years away. In some cases, they've maintained that entanglement for billions of years. So I'm partial to photons for quantum computing because they've been proven by the universe to be very stable. There's all kinds of tricks you can do with them. You can, like, one of the absolute hardest things to do is quantum memory. Just hold this answer for, 5 microseconds, and then give me that answer for my next calculation. It's almost impossible under most architectures.
Why is that?
How do you tell an electron to wait? You don't. You tell it to keep busy doing something else for exactly 5 microseconds, and then you read the result, and then it destroys it. This is hard. So in photonic quantum computing, what you do is you send it down a piece of fiber optics that is a length matching the time delay you want to have.
Interesting.
So if you want to delay this like 5.1 microseconds, meaning 5.005 milliseconds, like 1/1000th your ping time to your ISP, you can do that by just knowing the exact length of fiber optic cable that you need to send it through. The scaling technique here is that you need to have a very good fiber optic switch that's able to direct it where it needs to be, when it needs to be, send it down the right channel, wait for the fiber optic line to come back, and then either read or process the results or redirect it to a new location. The scaling limit is not the fiber optic cable. It's not the stability of the photons. It's simply the performance of that fiber optic switch. And PsiQuantum has built a really good one. They're currently redoing all of the silicon networking to be photonic networking by borrowing from the telecommunications industry that's pioneered this, and now they're just going, hey, we have these better physics techniques of very precisely controlling those photons. So now we're going to send them where they need to be, and we're not going to need so many cables. We're not going to need so much power. It's going to be cold and lossless and faster. So this is this is already being used by AI compute clusters, and you're going to see this technology branching out more and more ways. This is really tricky and really cutting edge, and it's not something I would bet against. It's something that I would say, we've got this thing called the internet. I think they figured out how to work with photons. So because they've figured out how to work with photons using the internet, and they've had 50, 60 years of experience doing this, they've gotten pretty good at it. And PsiQuantum is saying they don't want to invent new medium. They just want to use the existing fiber optics, the existing telecommunications industry, and the existing hardware that's already out there. The thing that they need to do is control those photonic emissions, reading and catching that photon, which they can do 99.1% of the time as of 3 years ago. And they need that fiber optic switch. And that's it, essentially.
What's the biggest quantum computer that PsiQuantum has built using this method, this approach?
The scary thing is they haven't told us. They have not said the number of qubits that they've got. They're on their 4th quantum computer, and they've told us nothing. How big is it? We have no idea. But they've been making thousands of qubits per month for almost 2 years now. Mass production from one of the 5G manufacturers that took over the biggest plant, and they are hiring continuously this entire time for as many people testing those things as they can possibly get. And they've been doing mass production of the fiber optic switches for several months. And I saw a picture on their LinkedIn of their first a photonic switch that they blurred out the serial number and they blurred out the chip revision and they blurred out all of the stuff that you couldn't read it. You just saw a picture of the silicon. Like, this is our fiber optic switch controller. How fast is it? We don't know. How good's the error correction? The last number we have is 99.1%. It's 2.5 years old. So they're saying they're going to have 1 million qubits by 2028.
Physical qubits or logical qubits?
Physical, but they can cycle them, and they've got RAM solves, and they're my number one bet for breaking Bitcoin. And they don't need, what they're waiting on is the building to finish. The building that has their gigantic tub of liquid helium and all of the permits and all of the production and all of the capabilities. What they're running at right now is a lab in Silicon Valley. I've got a manufacturing facility in Silicon Valley. They've got a fiber optic, a quantum computer, I think in Oxford, and another one in Cambridge, and another one at Stanford. So they're on quantum computer number 4, and they've told us nothing about any of them. So yeah, it makes me a little nervous.
Yeah.
This is why I'm like, we have to prepare, because they're not giving us timelines. They're not telling us how big it is. We're not seeing regular progress points. So I'm like, guys, the attack is coming. They said they're going to be ready by 2028, or like January 2028 at the latest. So we have to be ready before then.
That's less than 2 years away.
Yeah, I know. Bitcoin needs at least 3 years to upgrade.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the questions I had. Like, historically, how long has Bitcoin taken to implement?
It takes them a decade to do anything. What we need is to begin the migration to optional cryptography as soon as possible, because it takes literally a year if everyone's trying to sign transactions at the same time, and you still want to process ongoing transactions. If you want to turn off Bitcoin and then assemble a perfect line to do migration, it takes 2.5 months, assuming that you double the block size and you're cramming everything, and 100% of the transactions are perfectly ordered, and you just have this massive pile, and everyone's doing migration. If you're only migrating like 10% of the keys, then, well, you can cut that down to 10% of the time, but now you've got 90% exposure. So it's a problem. The next fastest quantum computer, which is faster than photonics, which are, it depends on the speed of their switch, so that they can have times as fast as 20 microseconds, and they can bring that down to around 5 microseconds. So 1,000 microseconds is 1 millisecond. If you're looking at your ping times, 1,000 microseconds is 1 millisecond. The faster is something called electron spin. If you take those giant pinball machines where you have you drop a marble and then the marble bounces down, imagine that those pins are all atoms and you're dropping 1 electron.
Okay.
It bounces through the calculations. In 2023, Intel was making these wafers about as big as your chest. There were 24,000 electron spin qubits. Their circuits were 7 qubits long. And then in 2024, they had 12 qubit long circuits. If they could,
What does it mean to say 7 qubit long or 12 qubit long circuits? Like,
1 electron did 7 things, 7 gates.
7 computations.
Yes, 7 operations. Add or rotate or, yeah.
And the more it does, the fewer such electrons we will need and the faster things will happen.
This is incredibly fast. This is like borderline. This is, basically in the competition for being the fastest. And they're making these 24,000 qubit wafers, and we haven't heard anything from them for 2 years. I checked their press releases this morning, and they've had 0 press releases for 2 years on quantum computing. But this is fast. This is demonstrated. This is production
Who
at
is
scale.
doing this?
Intel.
Intel. Oh,
Yeah. Around tied for speed, you've got the Majorana by Microsoft, the superconducting by Google, the cat qubits by Alice and Bob, and the IBM Huron processor. And these are all different ways of doing magnetic operations. It has to be much colder than the photonics. The photonics run at a balmy 2 Kelvin, which is just slightly colder than outer space. And the photons are fine at any temperature, like the middle of the sun, they're fine. But the machine that catches and reads those photons needs to be cold. They could possibly, they can run it at 4 Kelvin, but they noticed that it works better at 2 Kelvin, so they're just going to run it at 2 Kelvin. This is a massive difference because they don't need liquid metal helium. They only need compressed helium.
which is easier to get.
The liquid metal version comes from volcanoes and glaciers. And you have to mine an enormous amount of ice or rock in order to get a little bit of helium-3 and helium-4. The other place to get it is from a nuclear reactor. If you're doing, nuclear fission and you pump a whole bunch of helium into it, some of that helium will become helium-3 and helium-4. It's helium with extra, 1 or 2 neutrons over the standard, 2. So helium-3 has 3 neutrons and helium-4 has 4 neutrons. Helium-2 is standard helium. Psi quantum can use standard helium at 2 Kelvin. Cut that temperature by 100, and you're running out of very cold 20 microkelvin, or 20 millikelvin, excuse me. And that 20 millikelvin is from this radioactive isotope helium that comes from nuclear reactors or volcanoes or Antarctica or the moon. Yeah. It's very cold. They run it through a loop, so they're not burning it, but every device needs more of it. And it's very energy intensive, and that's where some of the energy calculations for how much energy does it take to mine Bitcoin using quantum computers come from. There's more energy efficient qubits out there, like photonic, but they're like, here's the range, here's the most efficient, here's the average efficiency, here's the faster ones, here's how many you need. Superconductors are the most fragile qubits. They're the ones that are the shortest lived, but they're the fastest to operate, and the calculations are done very quickly.
So when people just quote headlines or talk in terms of okay, how many logical qubits you've achieved, or how many Toffoli gates you've achieved, or for how long you've maintained coherence or entanglement, it's maybe an okay approximation, but it's not a very accurate way of speaking, because all the architectures are unique and they have unique strengths and weaknesses. And it might be easier for a certain architecture to have lots of logical qubits, but then the computation time would be too long and the coherence would not be long enough to last for that amount of time. And it could be something different with a different sort of approach.
The number of qubits and how long they last, these are both useful numbers. But within error correction, there's so many things that you can do. You can set aside spare qubits waiting for a failure, and then they'll jump in at the time they're needed to save the calculation. Is that a logical qubit? Well, technically, no. Were you able to do a calculation? Absolutely, yes. So people want these like hard and fast, like help me understand this in 5 minutes or 2 minutes and tell me when this is a threat. Like, number one, the companies are not telling us. The best companies are not public. They're private. They're not selling their successes as stock. They're taking orders for science, and they're doing real work. Number two, all the topologies are so different. You can't compare apples to oranges to pineapples to a bear. Like, these don't compare the same way. They're not fundamentally the same type of thing. And like when quantum computer or a cryptographically relevant quantum computer, the answer is usually they're defaulting to RSA 2048, and they're calculating this really big 2048-bit key, and they're trying to factor it to two smaller numbers. But in Bitcoin and Ethereum, what we care about is this elliptic curve that's 256 bits. It's literally 1/8 the size, and it's solved in 1/5 the work. But that 1/5 the work means that you have to use far less error correction. You don't have to have, like, the calculations are like 10 to 100 times faster to break the elliptic curve instead of the RSA 2048.
Why is it 10 to 100 times faster when it is only 1/5 the work?
So let's say that it takes 6,000 qubits to hold the 2048 qubits, both of the factored numbers, and then some logical qubits to do the work.
Correct.
But it only takes like 700 qubits or 1,200 qubits to do the same thing for elliptic curves. At 256-bit, you've got the prime number, you've got both halves of the public key. Well, that's 768 qubits right there, right? And then there's the work that you're doing to swap these around and perform the calculation. And that's, like another 500 qubits. So instead of needing 6,000 qubits, you need 1,200 qubits just to hold the variables. The amount of work, the time that it takes, is the number of gates, which this is a very different calculation trying to solve an elliptic curve versus factoring a very big number into two smaller numbers. There's overhead based off of the number of qubits you literally have to move around. You have to send these things through gates, which means you have to have a certain number of gates ready to do an operation against every qubit in memory. And so you're having to line them all up and then perform the gates sequence, and this creates this rectangle. And the area of that rectangle is much smaller for elliptic curves. So it's easier to do, which means that you don't need to worry about the whole thing breaking apart. If it takes less time, you don't need as much coherence. You don't need as much error correction. You don't need to worry about noise as much. You don't have to have 5 times the amount of quantum RAM. So there is a lot of optimizations that can occur to break elliptic curves a lot faster than RSA. But the people are just looking at the qubits in the timeline. They're not looking at even what cryptography is being broken. And one of the most common things that people ask is, well, aren't they just going to attack the banks first? No. Banks use RSA 2048, which is why those papers were talking about RSA 2048, because they were trying to warn the banks, here's when you have to upgrade. So the 2030 deadline that NIST gave, that's for banks. blockchain gets broken before that. So Bitcoin needs to worry about sooner by like 1 to 3 years. And the reason that the number varies, and it might be as little as 6 months between like breaking ECC 256 and breaking RC 2048, is that the hardware architecture matters. If you're doing a neutral atom, you can just set up the same thing you just built and make more of them. And then have them all just have one controller. And now you've upgraded from ECC 256 to RSA 2048 by making 6 of the same thing. No fundamental new technology for networking. No new fundamental technology for error correction. You just did the same thing a few months in a row. And that's the same thing that PsiQuantum is approaching. Their photonic architecture doesn't need a fundamental breakthrough. They just need to have a faster switch so they can control more photons in parallel. And maybe the switch is already fast enough. Maybe they're mass producing the thing that they need right now, and they just need a bigger lab. We don't know. So there's a whole bunch of like question marks, and I'm going to quote Jameson Lopp from Bitcoin 2025. He says, "We don't know how much we don't know. The unknown unknowns are so big, this is hard to plan around." And so BIP 361 was, let's begin the discussion about what we don't know. Because there's so many things we don't know because they are not telling us. And if they have any cooperation with the National Security Agency, the NSA of the United States, or the similar programs for Russia or China, they're not going to tell us. They don't have to tell us. In some cases, they can't tell us. But because Bitcoin, maxis aren't being told on a regular memo of exactly all of their top secret clearance information, they're just saying, "Oh, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist because I don't have top secret clearance." Well, if you did have top secret clearance, you wouldn't be able to talk about it. In which case, the public wouldn't know. So it's difficult.
People keep asking me where to buy Bitcoin safely in India. I use GetBit for all my Bitcoin purchases. It's the one I recommend to friends and family as well. GetBit is India's first Bitcoin-only exchange. No distractions, no casino coins, only Bitcoin. You can set up a Bitcoin SIP with GetBit starting at just ₹100, which makes stacking sats really easy. And whenever you're ready, you can withdraw your Bitcoin to your own private wallet for free. So you don't ever have to worry about a hack. If you want to check it out, you can use my code DVJBTC for 30% off on platform fees for the first 3 months. The link is in the description. I know there's no way of knowing this for sure, but what is your best estimate? What is your best guess for when a quantum computer that can break the elliptical curve, the 256-bit elliptical curve encryption that Bitcoin relies on, when will that be built?
I'm going to answer this 3 times in 3 different ways. The first way I want to answer this is the attacker has 5 possible companies that might attack elliptic curves and drain Bitcoin. One of them is the People's Republic of China. And these companies, these groups, they're saying 2027 or 2028, they'll be ready. Or you just look at their roadmap and you go, they're saying they're going to have, 2,000 logical qubits. That's double what's necessary. You just compare the roadmap against the the resource estimates and you're like, wait a minute, they're saying next year they're going to have more qubits than is required today. And the algorithms are going to improve between now and next year. So when is it going to be broken? Probably as soon as that hardware is finished. So the first way that I think, I'm not saying this is the most likely, but I'm saying we should plan around when the attacker says they're going to be ready. The second way I want to answer this is what I think is most likely. Most likely, I consider mid-2028 to be, like the most likely time, because the number of companies that says they're going to be ready by that time starts to skyrocket. You're not talking about like one or two companies saying they're going to be ready. You're looking at like 10, 20. When 20 companies say, we're going to be able to break Bitcoin, maybe they're serious. And the third deadline that I like to give is the experts are saying 2020 or 2029. They consider the most likely date, like early 2029 or late 2028. And that means, like, if you were to only allowed to bet on one number, what number would you pick? If you bet wrong by like a month, then you don't win. So what number would you pick as the most likely? So there's different ways of asking this question, and there's different ways of answering it. Like, when should we be ready? I think before the attackers say that they're going to be ready. When you're looking at post-quantum cryptography, this is like putting on a seatbelt. It's a safety to prevent a future accident, right? You're not saying that you're going to have a car crash in 2028. You're saying, when should the seatbelt be ready? If you put on the seatbelt after the car crash, it doesn't help. The quantum attacker will be able to migrate to the post-quantum cryptography with your money. Your money will be moved by them to the new post-quantum version of Bitcoin. How much is that worth? Well, to me, it's worth nothing because my money's gone. But they're like, oh, we'll wait for Satoshi's wallet to be drained, and then we'll add post-quantum cryptography. Like, what's wrong with you? Really, what's wrong with you? Why do you not understand this? You do not open the parachute after you land face first into a mountain. That is not the time to put on the parachute. You don't jump out of a plane, wait till you hit, and then go, oh yeah, my parachute, and then wear it as a blanket. That's not how parachutes work. We have to use the parachute before impact, before you hit in the mountain. It is not a blanket. A blanket does not save you from falling to your death. So I think we should have the seatbelt, the parachute, and the post-quantum cryptography before impact.
I'll push back a little bit on this.
Okay. I'm willing to defend my position.
Targets for breaking certain kinds of encryption have been released by many companies, many different players in this space before as well. Targets for not just breaking encryption, but having a certain level of development when it comes to building these machines out. These targets have mostly been missed. So a lot of people who argue that the estimates that have been put out by these companies now are optimistic. They're relying on the historical track record of these companies. What do you have to say? What makes you more fearful today that this time the estimates are actually more likely to be right?
So looking at IBM's roadmaps, they completely missed all of their roadmaps except I think one target in 2024. If you look at Google's roadmaps, they were saying they were going to have a massive computer by now. They're switching architectures to neutral atom. Neutral atom targets have been hit. Superconducting targets have been missed. Superconducting targets are hard to hit because you need to have literally millions of wires kept near absolute zero. photonic targets have been consistently hit. So first off, don't look at company and technology A as a method of measuring company and technology B. Second of all, some companies have a good track record. Other companies have a bad track record. They're not the same team. They're not the same technology. Third, some of the leaders were projecting that they're going to stay leaders, and they have. It's just they haven't had the cryptographic relevant quantum computer that they said that they were going to have in 2025. It's still not here yet, but that doesn't mean that it's not coming. It just means that the list of things that we don't know is higher. The amount of notice that we will likely get is 30 days. The consensus among cryptographers is that we will get 30 days notice at most before quantum computers start breaking cryptography.
And why will we get that 30 days notice?
That's considered a courtesy.
Interesting.
It is just a courtesy. They could break it. They could break Bitcoin and not tell anybody and then announce at the same time that Satoshi's wallet is drained. They could spend like their total R&D budget of $1 billion. That's how much they've spent so far. And they could earn $500 billion in value, short the asset, and then make money from the crash that they cause. Possibly more than $500 billion. So it's a bad bet to say that we've got years, even if they're missing their deadlines, even if they're missing their milestones. I don't necessarily believe IonQ because they have a history of lying. I still list the date that they claim that they will be able to earn money from Shor's algorithm. Not because I believe them, but because it's one drop in a bucket that's about to overflow. When will it overflow? We don't know. But it's a stupid idea to ignore the bucket completely, because we may only have 30 days notice. And 30 days is just a courtesy. And China would probably love to destroy America's cryptography and Bitcoin and a bunch of other things. The People's Republic of China stated on the evening news that they have to destroy Bitcoin in order to have the government survive. And the reason for this is they're losing a third of their GDP per year in Bitcoin. There's only a few ways to smuggle money out of China. One of them is to buy art. And they'll buy a piece of art, send it on an airplane, and they'll get like 10 or 20% of their money back out. It's a bad deal. Another way to get money out of the People's Republic of China is to do a corporate IP theft against themselves, where the assets go to a company in Singapore, and then China arrests everybody involved. That's what they've done. The third way is Bitcoin. And so the government says they have to destroy Bitcoin in order to prevent their economy from completely imploding. Will they? Well, they're building a quantum computer, one of every type. When you look at these companies, a company's building one quantum computer of one architecture. Google's the first one to go cross-disciplinary and say, we're going to build superconducting and we're going to build neutral atom. What's China building? One of everything. They've got all of these quantum computing research projects nationalized. They're treating quantum computing as one of the pillars of their economy, right up there with robots. Look at how many robots they've got. Now they've got robots carrying machine guns. They've got robots chasing people down the street. They've got it so that they're going to hone in and chase people down. This is considered one of the pillars of their economy. The other is quantum computing. They're spending a lot of money on this. They've spent more money than the United States up until very recently. Maybe the United States, among all of the companies combined, is starting to spend more money than China.
And China makes this information public that they're investing in it. They might not release the details of what they've achieved, but
they compete with information. So when Google released Willow, China released information. Zhengzhou. I'm sorry about my Chinese pronunciation. Xiangzhou. Their quantum computer was bigger and faster than Google's and had better error correction than Google's. They had a better quantum computer than Google. They just released the paper, in response to what Google announced. And they put it up available in the cloud to try out and test. So they compete with the narrative, and competition is how they intend to become the strongest nation on earth. That is their intention. They want to become number one, and they're treating quantum computing as a way to get there.
there's another aspect of the developments in quantum computing that I feel that a lot of people who are skeptical of it are missing, which is that the algorithmic improvements have been exponential and they haven't stopped. Google's latest paper actually had a couple of graphs dedicated to this, showing the exponential improvement in the number of the Foley gates required and the number of logical qubits required to break RSA 2048. If this continues into the future, we will need to take even smaller steps on the hardware side of things to break this cryptography.
Every year, the number of qubits required goes down, and every year, the number of qubits we have goes up. Eventually, these two meet. So it used to be like this, and now it's very rapidly, the two lines are approaching each other, and the hardware capabilities will reach the algorithm required. If you start the chart at the year 2020, and you just progress from there, the number of qubits required has decreased by 10x or 100x every 1 to 2 years. I was more scared of the algorithm improvements than I was of the hardware improvements in 2024. The fear is just increased. I am not sleeping well still, and it's been 2 years. I haven't slept well in 2 years. So the problem here is that it's getting easier and easier to break the world.
Is there a floor to how far the algorithms can drop the physical requirements? Like, is there a theoretical minimum?
Yes. The theoretical minimum for Shor's is something like 768 against 256 qubits. And the theoretical minimum for another algorithm is 257 qubits. But the best instance that we've got right now is 513. That's logical, but logical is any method of doing error correction. So it could be 513 physical, but 50 spares. And then you just need to cycle the gates.
More than the number of logical qubits, the challenge has been to maintain coherence over longer periods of time when you have a bunch of these entangled logical qubits. So what's the state of the art on that front? What's the most that any company has managed to maintain coherence for over a decent number of logical qubits?
Those are different answers. If you're trying to combine the two technologies, I think the answer is a few hours, and that was by Q era. That might be the record still, where they finished several hours of calculation with logical qubits. If you just want the raw, like what's the longest coherence time, I think it was 2.5 days by Oxford Ionics of 0 logical qubits. It was two total qubits, but the problem wasn't coherence, it was computation. When you have a large number of qubits and you have spares, you don't need any of them to last the entire computation. You can cycle the qubits in and out as part of the gate. You just need to have a logical coherence time, not a physical coherence time. And this depends on the error code, and there's over 1,000 different error codes, and they can just pick a different error code that's optimized for either performance or duration. And as long as it fits their geometry, and literally this is like, sometimes it's 3D, sometimes it's 5D, sometimes it's 2D. There's different geometric shapes to each of the error correction codes. And as long as it fits their geometry, it's good to go. They can optimize for performance or for time or a blend. I don't want to go too deep into the details, but it's optional. There's a lot of variety, and there's now going to be an exponential increase because the information is organized better. It's now open sourced and searchable, as opposed to, oh, I heard this is the right gate to use.
You said that Q era held logical qubits in coherence for a few hours and performed computations with them. What did they achieve with it? Like, what computation did they perform? What problem did they solve?
So one of the things that quantum computers are really good at is chemistry. When we attempt to, if you look at like how much energy do we spend on doing silicon versions of chemistry, it's more than Bitcoin.
Interesting.
We spend more energy trying to do chemistry than we do mining Bitcoin. So the problem that Q era solved was chemistry. And they finished the calculation and they published the results. And now that is information available to science on, I think it was how strontium works.
Okay.
The problem is that every single chemical with isotopes has different chemical properties. And so you can just look at helium, a noble gas that doesn't react with anything, and you can model helium-2, helium-3, helium-4, helium-1, all differently. And they will have different chemical properties. And if you don't have a large amount of helium-1 around, it's really hard to figure out what that chemistry looks like. So they can model temporary or rare isotopes. One of the reasons why error correction had such a huge jump is that instead of just making parts themselves, companies were able to order isotope pure components and have them delivered to their door. So instead of making the sensors themselves in their lab, it just arrived in the mail. And they were pure. And if it was 99% pure, they had 99% less errors. It's an approximation. It depends on the type of equipment. But on my X account, I pinned this paper that talked about isotope purity and supply chain as a major shift in 2023 to the entire industry. These quantum computers may calculate the chemistry for the next quantum computers that perform much better. Also, we can make computers that don't use as much power and don't heat and don't need cooling. That's valuable chemistry.
So QEra used their quantum computer to solve a real chemistry problem, but they didn't use it to factor a number that can grab headlines. And this is a very common line of criticism or skepticism that you see for the capability of quantum computers, that 15 still remains the largest number factored by a quantum computer without assistance from a classical computer. So you're saying that if QEra, for instance, chose to use their quantum computer to factor a number using Shor's algorithm, they would have factored a larger number than 15?
At the time that they released that paper, they didn't have Toffoli gates. Now they have Toffoli gates on their neutral atom architecture. So they couldn't have factored a number without tricks when they released their paper. If they just want to grab headlines, there's lots of ways of grabbing headlines. My concern for the industry is that even when QEra did this massive result and they were the record largest quantum computer in the world, no one cared. So let's say they come up with this cryptographically relevant quantum computer and it's not made by IBM or Google. How did they get the headlines? Bitcoin hacked. That's the headline that gets them customers. Whether or not they sell the Bitcoin is irrelevant to the damage that it does. That's one of the few ways that they will be able to make headlines, and one of the few ways they will be able to get attention, customers, and stock price to go up.
If companies chose to spend all their quantum resources on factoring numbers, today they will have factored larger numbers than 15, is your best assumption?
Well, there was an elliptic curve that was solved using IBM's Huron. And it used, I think it was 104 qubits, and it was by Steve Tipanikich. And he managed to solve a 6-bit elliptic curve with a partial Shor's implementation. And people hated on him because it wasn't a full Shor's algorithm implementation. He managed to do it with a minimum number of qubits and break an elliptic curve. And all he got was hate. So what's the incentive for the next group or the next company to demonstrate their capabilities? Very little. So could we break larger numbers today? Yeah. It just requires an enormous amount of engineering and maybe custom, algorithm types. One of the things that Pierre-Luc Daumier says is, unfortunately, the next milestone for quantum computing is breaking Bitcoin. It's not chemistry. It's not, drug discovery. It's not finance calculation. Literally, the next rung on the ladder that they have to climb is breaking Bitcoin. And if you break a 32-bit elliptic curve, going to a 256-bit elliptic curve may only be a month afterward.
Why is that the case?
You need most of that quantum computer anyway. So if let's say that you're building out a neutral atom array to do this, you're going to need maybe 10,000 qubits, and you're going to have to cycle them over and over and over. 10,000 physical qubits, and you have to cycle them. But to go from that to breaking Bitcoin is just going to be a faster controller. It's not going to be more qubits. It's just going to be managing them better. Maybe they'll need more qubits instead of having a faster controller. There's lots of ways that they can optimize this. They can optimize this lots of different ways. They can just cut down error correction and just do it repeatedly. If their average solve time is around the same as their logical coherence time, run it 3 times. You'll get a success on the 3rd try. You'll get the headline on the 3rd try. You'll get billions of dollars on the 3rd try. It's not a fundamental engineering or scientific shift to going from breaking elliptic curve 32 to breaking elliptic curve 256. It's just scale and like tweaking values, and it just might be like a month or 3 months of engineering and setting up a second laser or a third laser to run in the same scheduler. It just might be software controllers that has to change. The fundamental technology is essentially the same, but it can also be solved by scale. So let's say that you can break a 30-qubit elliptic curve and you don't change any of the fundamental technology. Yeah, you could just make it bigger and then run it again. And then you'll have 256-bit elliptic curve. So you can do this lots of different ways, and there isn't a really harsh minimum. There's just a harsh minimum to get that attention. That paycheck has a lot of different ways to get it. And there's lots of different ways to make that happen.
So when there are people like Brandon Black who argue that we should act based on evidence and not based on claims, and he wants us to set out some clear conditions that can act as warning signals for the community that, okay, if these conditions are being met, then we have to think about like post-quantum cryptography for Bitcoin. He's missing out on a lot of things. He's missing out on the fact that those signals will not necessarily be publicly displayed or announced. Once you get a signal for a smaller problem being cracked, the time it would take for the bigger problem to be cracked won't be that much. And in many cases, you could use the same technology and just use multiple of those machines and sort of break the problem into smaller parts and feed them, depending on the particular approach and the architecture.
And the algorithm. So Google had their paper. 2 days later, there was a Chinese paper that says, oh, well, we have the same number of qubits as the amount that you didn't reveal. How? And here's distributed technology where they don't even have to have the quantum machines communicate. We'll just break the problem into smaller pieces. The total number of qubits is the same as yours. And now it's a distributed technology instead of a centralized technology. This is changing too fast. This is a competition to control the world or destroy the economy or just become the richest country on earth. Now, if you remove the fundamental proving and security mechanism in blockchain, you have fundamentally destroyed a $5 trillion market. What is the projected financial cost when you include all of the stocks, all of the corporate assets, all of the commingling, and all of the government that holds Bitcoin and all of these other blockchain assets, and the central bank digital currencies, which includes the yuan, and you include the stable coins, holding treasuries. What's the total financial ripple that occurs? Enormous. If you can just know the timing, you can make hundreds of billions of dollars. They don't even have to sell Bitcoin to make that occur. They just need to know when it will occur in order to make that amount of money. So whoever develops this technology has a massive financial incentive to simply rig the market. If we prepare for the crash by waiting for the crash, we have used our parachute as a blanket. I don't think that we will get a big announcement from China. You have 28 days before we destroy your economy. You have 27 days before we destroy your economy. You have 26 days until we... No, they're just going to do it. Like, why would they tell us? Why would they tell us? That would destroy the entire asymmetric balance of information. If they tell us exactly what and when, we can counter it. So why would they tell us? He wants absolute information. He wants a very steady progress. Well, your very steady progress is that decrease in the hardware requirement and the increase in the qubits. He's like, no, I want a different metric because that one's too dangerous. Okay, your parachute is a blanket.
So, if we are not going to get an announcement, a declaration, what can people do to keep track of progress in this field? What parameters, what yardsticks can they use to assess how close at least the publicly disclosed quantum computers are to breaking electrical curve?
The thing that I'm asking people to pay attention to is the number of qubits. And you're going to continue to see headlines. Maybe this should convey a sense of urgency. And instead, it's just telling people that they just need to ignore all of the information. We'll just ignore it all and it's fine. And then impact. So, I don't like being a doomsayer. I'm just saying we just need to put on our seatbelt. That's what I'm saying. Just put on our seatbelt, right? Just ready the seatbelt, ready the parachute now. So I'm very much in the now category. But I think it's a bad idea to risk other people's money by lying to them. That tends to make people upset. That's a bad idea in my book. I know that a lot of people are okay with that. I'm not one of those people. I would rather tell people the truth and let them decide if they want to risk their money. My recommendation right now is, hold Bitcoin. We're going to try and fix this. And then Bitcoin saying, no, don't fix it. Why do you hate Bitcoin so much? Like, why don't you want this technology to survive? No, we love Bitcoin. Then let us do our job. No! I don't know what to do.
Couple of things that come to mind when I wonder why people have this kind of reaction to this, right? Firstly, what would be the cost of putting on that seat belt or using that parachute? What are trade-offs that you have to make? What are things that you'll have to compromise on? What are things that might break, that currently work very well, or that will have to be rebuilt? So that's one thing that comes to mind.
This is different for different blockchains. For Bitcoin, there won't be as much space for JPEGs. We're gonna have to give up the idea of having enough extra block space for a lot of JPEGs. That doesn't seem like a really harsh trade-off to me, because the JPEGs will be worthless anyway if Bitcoin dies, right? So maybe we should prioritize the block space for post-quantum signatures. People are putting the cost of the transactions as one of the reasons why not to do it. And my counter is, look, the longer we wait, the more it's going to cost and the more damage there will be and the more people will be left behind. By migrating early, people have longer to migrate their funds to safety and to wake up to the reality that people are naysaying or fighting against or warning about, or this narrative will have time to play out as long as we do the technology as soon as possible. It doesn't cost you anything to do a soft fork. It's just consensus. It's just like people can't hate it that much. And so people are focusing on hating the idea of securing Bitcoin against a possible threat. And then there's other narratives like, well, we need to do all these other things instead. And I'm like, none of those things matter if Bitcoin's worthless.
There are also concerns about, for instance, layer 2 solutions that have been built. So they all rely on Taproot, if I'm not wrong. And Taproot addresses are especially vulnerable even when you receive Bitcoin, because they're not like, they're tweaked, but a quantum computer can still reverse engineer your private key and then spend it, right? So you'll have to build all of that infrastructure again.
In the Bitcoin world, I would advise against layer 2s by default, because if it's exposing your public key and their public keys, and there's too much shenanigans regarding the cryptography, and it's usually just a wallet and a database. I used to love the ideas of layer 2s, and then I looked at what they actually did, and then I lost faith. I have no faith in layer 2s.
But at the same time, layer 2s perform a very important function, which is to make everyday small transactions fast and feasible. So maybe the current implementation is not great, but there should be some way for people to use Bitcoin to make small payments, to make payments quickly. Otherwise, it will never become money.
I completely agree with you. It's a more of a challenge for Bitcoin to add that security. A better fundamental security model is doing a ZK Stark based rollup, because this fundamental security you're trusting is the same hash that Bitcoin already uses. So there's far less security assumptions. You're trusting a hash, and then you're able to process any number of transactions per block. It's just that it's a side calculation that gets proven, as opposed to trust in a wallet and a database. So I think that we can use Bitcoin as money without having such horrible trade-offs.
I think that would deserve an episode of its own. I'll stick to quantum computing today.
Yeah.
I want to know more about BIP 361, something that you have co-authored. What is it? What is its 3-phase implementation strategy that's getting a lot of traction, I feel, at least in my Twitter feed? And
It hasn't gotten much traction in mine. It was hated by Bitcoin Core so much that they said it wasn't actually a BIP. And then they're like, all right, we'll just put it in there to stop the drama. So it was a concession by them to admit to the idea of discussing the problem without actually doing much of the discussion. BIP 361 is fundamentally a talking piece. This is going to happen whether we do it or not. There will be a loss of funds. Either we're giving all of those funds to a quantum computer, or we're sunsetting a cryptography that has been deprecated for 13 years. Which one do you guys want to do? I don't care which, but we should at least make the decision instead of letting the decision be made for us. Like, it's one thing to have an intention and to follow through with the intention, and it's another thing to just close your eyes and wait for someone to hit you. I would rather make an intentional choice. I don't think it's up to me to make a choice or even to advocate heavily for one thing or another. I think that there has to be a consensus among the community on whether we're going to A, accept a massive price crash, or B, turn off people's assets that don't upgrade within a window. Are any of them good choices? No, they're all bad choices. The process should be discussed by everybody in a realistic manner, and instead I'm getting death threats. Like, that's not helping anything. We should try to save Bitcoin. And people are like, it's not at risk. David Shalom asked me, what's the biggest risk to Bitcoin? And I said, we are. Not the people in the room, but our inability to rationally discuss decisions is the biggest risk to Bitcoin. The governance layer is the problem. This is what's going to destroy Bitcoin. Our inability to talk rationally. And my concern is that there won't be enough migration time because we've wasted so much time. I've talked about this for 2 years. Time's up. We have to make a decision. I don't have any good answers. I just have a lot of bad choices that I want other people to make.
Have you heard about the lifeboat proposal?
So, Bitcoin Core developer mailing list is a cesspool of drama and people who refuse to discuss things. There's been a large number of decent proposals, all of which have failed to gain replies. And Bitcoin Core developers said, we'll talk about this in 10 years, when quantum computers exist and Satoshi's funds have been drained. The lifeboat proposal was one of the variations to commit to a hash of a signature as a method of making it so you can prove funds. And instead of revealing a transaction, you're revealing a hash that ends up becoming a proof of a migration. This is a technical choice to a coordination problem that people are refusing to acknowledge. Is it a decent proposal? Yes. Is it a decent bad proposal? Yeah. Is it gaining traction? No. Should it? Maybe. It's just that people don't even admit that there's a problem yet still. So they're not discussing the merits of Lifeboat versus Hourglass versus a ledger copy versus BIP361. It should be a formal BIP. It should be evaluated on its technical merits. And then, I don't know, maybe let the market decide. I don't know.
I wanted you to dive into the three-phase implementation of BIP361.
There is not a consensus on how to implement the phases. There has not, like, BIP361 is trying to force a discussion that people refuse to have. It's not a technical proposal. There was technical merits and technical points that people still refuse to acknowledge the need to have the discussion about. So it's draw a boundary around transactions, like some selection criteria, maybe include Taproot, maybe BIP360 gets adopted, you're not going to include Taproot, just like maybe just PTU PK, right? Select some transactions. Pick a date for them to be no longer accepted. Offer a migration path. Wait 5 years. I don't think we have 5 years, but I mean, that's the path that was proposed. It just hasn't been discussed. I'm going to just continue working and pretend that we didn't need consensus. And we may be able to save Bitcoin despite the people involved. I encourage other technical proposals to do the same thing. Because if we have the code and the code works, we can evaluate the code better, and maybe people will use it and migrate. Out of all the proposals, I prefer Hourglass version 2 the most. I just don't think it's going to happen. It's not up to me to decide. It's up to everybody else to decide.
Do you think it's possible that a cryptographically relevant quantum computer never gets built?
I'm gonna try and quote verbatim what I've heard physicists say. We would have to have new physics because right now it's going to happen. Like, we would have to have a completely new understanding of physics. Right now, we have physical devices that are scaling better and better and better. We're learning more by creating the technology. The technology works. It's a bit strange to think that there's going to be a sudden cliff. Pierre-Luc has evaluated several sudden cliff proposals, and he's like, this is just completely arbitrary. They picked a number and said, it's impossible to do X, and then X gets done, and we're like, oh, well. So they either look very futuristic, or they just hide the paper and don't mention it again. The proposals that say this will never happen don't have merit. They have reasons, but without merit. I listen to the physicists, and the physicists say, well, our current understanding of physics says yes. We would have to have a new understanding to slow us down. So my common question to people that say, oh, it'll never happen is, with what physics? Where's your quantum physics that says that? Show me your physics. Because I haven't seen any physics that says this is impossible. Show me your physics. It turns out they're not physicists. So
You're working on something called QuantumEVM. Would you like to explain what that is?
So Bitcoin has a problem with some of a small percentage of the ledger. Ethereum has a problem with everything. Proof of stake, smart contracts, the size of the addresses of the smart contracts, the cryptography, the consensus model, the layer twos, the admin contracts, and the proving mechanisms. Everything. So I made in 2024, when I read the quantum physics algorithm advances, and some of the changes to how soon cryptographic machines would be able to, or cryptography be broken by quantum computers. It's like, it's time to make a failsafe. And Vitalik's proposal at the time was to burn half the wallets and then use your seed phrase as redemption, and that'll be their protection mechanism. Oh, and we have to rewind the chain and break all the layer twos and rewind the chain and break Bitcoin. And what? So I tried to, create just different cryptography on a system that worked. And it's just all post-quantum cryptography. It's in testnet. Everything works. We're probably going to have mainnet the middle of April. And this is my attempt to save the best parts of Web3, meaning something that works for businesses, something that works for users. I want to have this technology where we have blockchain plus JavaScript survive. And we had to redo, we have 256-bit addresses. We use crystal dilithium, which is the NIST proposed cryptography for digital signatures. We have scalability solved by distributing different shards. And so if somebody who's running an EVM today says, we need to start doing this post-quantum cryptography thing, they can license a shard from us. And we will be able to send transactions through layer 0 as opposed to like bridging or wallet database shenanigans. We'll just be able to have a transaction that's read between both chains technology, and you'll be able to transact against smart contracts on either chain. This also means that we can solve scalability by having a shard dedicated to games, a shard dedicated to supply chain, a shard dedicated to DeFi. And by localizing those transactions, we have less data to share. When you look at computer science, there's like this limit on how many is the ideal number of peers in a shared consensus model. The answer is around 20. You can go as high as 30 without strong penalties, but when you start hitting a couple hundred, you start just spending more time chatting than you do working. So we want to have these segments broken up into a single unified architecture for cryptography and a single unified ecosystem, and be able to send transactions to and from the different shards. So we're also solving the MEV attacks against DeFi by doing transactions come in and they're processed in the same order they came in. No one's able to spend an extra $100,000 to steal all of your money, which is a current weakness in Ethereum's ecosystem. And others, not just Ethereum, but the idea of editing the block scheduler to steal money is a problem in a lot of architectures. We just want to make this as compatible for business and as easy to use as possible and easy to migrate. And so we're going to have migration tools. It should take a dApp like 15 minutes to migrate. You recompile your contract, you have a second website, or you edit the website to change the URL of the blockchain, and you added a library called QEthers instead of ethers.js. And the API is the same, transactions are the same, the wallet is different, and all of the math is different. And it's just designed to be as safe as possible for Web3 technology in a post-quantum era. I'm trying to do the same thing for Bitcoin. It's just Bitcoin resists this at a fundamental level. And I really think that it is both good to have a secure, stable, fixed supply of money, and it's good to have blockchain plus JavaScript. And they solve different use cases and different problems. So I'm attempting to do as much as I can to make the world a better place. And this is one of those things. So QuantumEVM is attempting to save Web3. Another way that we phrase this is that this is Noah's Ark. You can get on the boat, you're post-quantum. You don't get on the boat, that's fine. I hope you can swim. Vitalik's proposal has been rejected, except for like maybe a break glass where they destroy most of the chain in order to keep some of the company around. Justin Drake is leading Lean Ethereum, and they're attempting to have a post-quantum solution by 2029. I have two issues at a technical level with this. The first is that I don't think we have that much time because the migration will have to occur, and you're going to have to edit or delete all of the data that doesn't migrate. It would suck to migrate all of your funds to post-quantum cryptography, and then you interact with DeFi, and then DeFi has a new Trojan library added by a hacked admin that drains your wallet. Authorizing a transaction against a known good list isn't enough because they can just edit the admin, edit the libraries, corrupt the supply chain, and corrupt and steal your post-quantum funds. The second is that it is far easier to Grover's attack Ethereum addresses than it is to Grover's attack Bitcoin addresses.
Why is that?
It's very technical. The process for Bitcoin is that you have to have a secret key, or excuse me, a private key, and then a public key, and then you SHA-256 it, and then you write MD160 that. And this is an enormous number. This is a massive quantum circuit. And that creates one hash. Does that hash match the target hash? That is the size of your quantum circuit to collide with a Bitcoin address. For Ethereum, it's hash plus a number. Increment the number. Do the same and then hash the result. And this is the nonce to generate a contract address architecture for generating contract addresses, which is just hash plus a number, hash plus a number, hash plus a number. And then you insert into your quantum circuit a new wallet-based hash, and then you do the same thing again. You test like 100,000 of them. And then you just keep inserting new addresses into the quantum circuit. And as soon as you load that quantum address, you can just load in another one and keep the process going and have a quantum circuit that basically does whatever your gate speed is times, say, 10,000. And that's the number of addresses that you can test simultaneously for Ethereum collisions. 160 bits is not enough against that. It's just not enough. Vitalik said it wasn't enough. It's just they gave up on upgrading the size of the contract and the wallet addresses. Like 2 years ago, they just said it's not possible. We edited the compiler, we edited the EVM, we edited the Merkle-Patricia-Troy tree, we edited the key value store, we edited all of the cryptographic protocols, we edited all the wallet protocols, we edited all of the Ethereum JS protocols, and we're starting with a fresh ledger. So there's only 256-bit addresses. It's kind of technical, but yeah, that's why we're safer against Grovers than Ethereum. And Bitcoin is in a better situation, but it's still a problem for them eventually.
Of all the things we've talked about today when it comes to the quantum threat to Bitcoin, is there anything that we should have talked about that we have not covered yet?
I think that the fundamental risk is the people involved in Bitcoin. And I want a better future. I want to save Bitcoin. I want Bitcoin to be here in 10 years. I'm concerned that the amount of time it takes us to implement any technical change has already exceeded our timeline for safety. We are living on borrowed time in Bitcoin. It takes too long to implement changes for us to safely do anything. So now quantum computing is so much of a threat that we don't have enough time to save Bitcoin. And it's time to make hard choices about which path moves forward. And there's too many egos in the room. We have to shed our ego and think that Bitcoin is more important than ourselves if we're going to save it at all.
Where can people go to find your work?
So I talk too much on X, especially when I can't sleep, and so I sometimes say crazy things. But my X handle is Ian_Smith_HSA. If you just search for Ian Smith, I'm the fourth one on the list usually. You can check on QuantumEVM.com and Linktree/QuantumEVM. So you can find me very easily, and you can find my X account and me talking about saving Bitcoin. I have my DMs open. I try to be very approachable. I have less patience than I should, especially for people who say that I'm just spreading FUD when I'm trying to save Bitcoin. But I try to be accessible and talk with people. I spend most of my time working on technology. So sometimes it might take a day or three before I reply, but I always read everything.
Ian, this has been incredible. This has been amazing. I've learned a lot. I'm sure anyone who's listened so far has learned a lot as well. I hope your goal with BIP 361 and with all the other work that you're doing, which is to start a discussion, a complete discussion, an honest discussion, I hope that happens.
It was a pleasure. I'm very glad to be here, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you.